This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gold.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. I'm Steve Gold. I'm your host, as the gentleman said. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Excited to be here on to episode number 97, if you can believe that. Big 97. I want to thank everybody recently for the rating and reviewing on iTunes. Those continue to grow. They're important because they help to get eyes on the show. I truly appreciate that. I want to do right off the top here. I want to do a roll call for the faithful listeners who help this show keep the lights on, keep the ship afloat. I'm talking about Jeremy Woods, Tony Fahey, Jacob Ruth, Rich Emery, William James Long, that's Deputy William James Long to you, Samantha Harper, the great Gary Steiner, Richard Wilson, Scott O'Donnell, the magnificent David Diaz, and Timothy Wright. Thank you. I love you. I'm in love with you. You guys are awesome. And I got to tell you, this list, although it hasn't grown too much over the last 6 months, has been very faithful. So I really appreciate that, guys. I even had a little break in there. It's really awesome, and I truly appreciate you. Right now, we have ad space open on the podcast. We just finished up with Hero Inc., who's an awesome company. So if you're interested in contacting or advertising the show, it's steve@thingspolicec.com, or you can go to the website, thingspolicec.com, and contact me there. I think that's pretty much for the... Well, one other thing I want to say is... there is a Facebook group. I don't mention it enough, but there's a Facebook group. If you want to go over there and join, it's kind of a good way to stay current with the show, see what's going on, because we are doing once every 3 weeks, we're doing a Cops in the News live. So it gives us an opportunity to interact with you guys. It goes up on the podcast, but if you want to join the conversation with Ken and I, you can do that on Facebook. So go join that group if you're interested at all. So without further ado, got a great guest today. I actually started... I reached out to him about a month ago to see if he'd be interested in coming on. He was, which I was thrilled. It's Jay Wiley. He's retired Baltimore PD, retired sergeant. He's also the host of the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast. So we're in the same space doing a similar thing, although he is simulcast over 80-plus stations. He's really killing it, and I'm just excited to have him. I'm going to get some stories out of him, and I'm really interested on hearing his journey into broadcasting. I know one thing cops are always talking about is, what will I do after this? Or what would I do if I quit being a cop? It's like a very popular thing, especially nowadays. So without further ado, let me bring on the great Jay Wiley. John.
Pleasure to be here with you, Steve. Appreciate it so much.
Oh, man. Great to have you, brother. Appreciate it. You've been such a help, even just in the last month. John he knows what he's doing. He's a professional broadcaster. I reached out to him and asked him to be a guest, and almost immediately, John, started asking you how to better my show. So it's really appreciated what you do. You're on Clubhouse, which is this app I didn't even know about. And it's super interesting. John it's kind of like a room, like an audio room, and you can go into, and it's kind of experts in your field, whatever you're interested in, kind of congregate there and talk. And you're kind of one of the guys, since I've joined, you're always in a room or part of a room as a speaker. So it's great.
And I love this app. It's a free app, by the way. If you don't have it, just a Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app. And, they've got LET Radio and Podcast Club. And I want to start having clubs and rooms where cops and other first responders can meet and their family members. And, we can restrict it so other people can't get there, and we can talk about whatever. Because sometimes it's easy to feel like you're all alone when you work in this career. When I was policing in Baltimore, and when I was on the job, I knew what to do. I knew my role. I knew how to handle myself. I knew all those things. It's when I got hurt and retired and went home and had nothing to do that all the skeletons, all the ghosts started to appear. So quite often people work, they do their shift, they go home. Some of them are single. They've had failed relationships, whatever it might be. And it's easy to go into really, really dark thinking. So I think Clubhouse can be a great tool for all of us to use.
That's awesome, John. Can you touch on how I have the questions I want to ask you. I want to hear your stories, but I'm super interested in how you got into broadcasting from police work.
Well, I'd love to tell you it's a long story. There's a couple wrinkles to it. Number one, I was hurt and retired young. I got into a fight over my service revolver. That's how long ago it was. Trying to arrest a car thief. Had a bunch of crack cocaine as well. And fighting over the gun, he wound up getting a hold of it while it was still in my hand. I was trying to reholster it. And we wound up firing all 6 rounds. Fortunately, neither one of us were hit. And he was arrested. And I thought I sprained my wrist. And I had multiple surgeries on my right hand. I'm right-handed. A steel plate fusing the base of my right thumb. Then my total wrist was fused and a couple other surgeries. And I was retired at the age of 33. And so I started thinking, what do you do now? What do I do when I grow up? Now, all I know is policing, and that's all I thought I was good at. And I did the sales route. I did other things. I didn't really like it. And I began in the early days we now consider podcasting. I did a recorded show using an old microphone I bought secondhand, refurbished, and cool edit. And I put up an MP3 version of the show on a website, and it was called Biker Bros. And it was a motorcycle lifestyle thing where we focused on events around Daytona and put it on a website with MP3 script, and people downloaded it. And then I started really falling in love with it. But I'll go back to, I was walking a foot post one day. I was a young patrolman. And here's 2 real stories that happened. I walked in this barbershop in this neighborhood and said, "Hey, how y'all doing? Nice to meet you. I'm Officer Wiley." I was on loan that section of the district. And one of the guys walked in. He goes, heard me talk. He goes, "Man, you got a great voice. You could be selling Afro Sheen and all kinds of products on the radio. We need to get you on it." I never forgot that conversation. Second story is the way our department's set up. We had the dispatches downtown. So you'd have each sector would be divided into an area, northwest, western, and northern with one area. So when I worked midnight shift, if we had to go down and get reports or whatever it might be, we were always taught to call the dispatchers. Do you need coffee? You need anything, whatever it might be? We need coffee, get this, and this. So I stop at a convenience store, get the coffee. I drive down there. I get buzzed in to the dispatch area. And the dispatcher looked at me and said, "Like, what can I do for you?" I went, "I'm 635 unit. I got coffee for you." And all of a sudden, she went slack-jawed. I mean, it's like her jaw hit the floor. Like the scene from Christmas Carol where Bob Marley, the ghost of Marley, he unstraps the thing and his jaw falls. And I'm like, "What's the matter?" She goes, "Well, I got to be honest with you. We thought you were black because you sound just like Barry White. And it turns out you're very white." And from that point on, I was called very white. Anytime there's a bad call, like decomposing body, whatever it was, they, hey, Very, how you doing? How's things going? Where's the stinker at? And so any bad call, they always preface it with that.
That's awesome.
That's a long story short.
I love it. So, John, would you say, had you always thought of radio, or was that guy saying that about your voice kind of got your mind going on it?
I had a love affair with radio as a kid. And it turns out I'm not the only one. There's several retired police across the United States who are FM music jocks. And I've been full-time FM music jock for about 18 years, specializing in classic rock or AAA type stations, alternative rock stations. And I do middays in the Florida Keys at a radio station in Key West, and my on-air name is Ripley. There are several police that went into this field like in their 30s and 40s and are very good at it. And here's a couple of reasons why. We're used to operating under pressure. Right. We're used to operating under stress. And like one of my radio bosses say, "I don't want to stress you out. You got to do the spot again." I'm like, "Look, dude, no one's shooting at me. This is not a big deal. It's not life or death. It's radio." So it's entertaining and little things like trying to help people avoid delays and accidents and fires or whatever it might be. That's part of our nature. So I think it's a natural transition. And I've fallen in love with radio since I was a little kid.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about the pressure, because I took a little break from police work, a little bit of a walkabout in the country. Was in Southern California. I did like a desk job, and I remember saying to my wife after a year, I said, "The weirdest thing is, I've not had like an adrenaline drop in a year." Yeah. I've not, because your tolerance for it goes higher when you're a cop. So, you're not responding to people screaming and bloody and "help me" and all this stuff. You're just like, anything that comes up is just kind of like, mellow. It's like it was a very peaceful feeling. Absolutely.
I tell people jokingly, and it's half jokingly, I think I missed being shot at. I missed being in gunfights because part of me loved it, loved the adrenaline afterwards. I didn't like the fear afterwards, but when all that went away and it's just you and it's routine, it's mundane, day in, day out, there's a big fall off for a lot of people. And I was one of them, and it was a huge drop off. And I really didn't know what to do myself, and I was bored to tears.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You go to a call, it's stress or it's high stress for those, moments. And in it, it can be scary. But later when your brain, when you look back on it and you're talking about it, it was exciting and you liked it. It's funny how your brain does that.
I sometimes wonder, how did I make it out? And the reason I say that, I'm not saying this to be sarcastic or funny. So many good police that I knew that were killed or were severely maimed. I'm physically disabled, but I'm able to do a lot of things. But so many people that were really, really good at what they didn't make it. And I'm one of the ones that didn't. And I really don't know why sometimes. And I guess it's best just not to think too long about it, because what's the old saying about you staring the abyss too long, it'll stare back at you.
Right.
And it gets a little creepy sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my worldview, it's God had a plan for your vocation and he wasn't through with you yet. So here you are helping me.
Or maybe I'm not ready for that yet. That might be it too. He's like, right. He's not sure he's ready for me yet. I've got some mellowing out to do.
Absolutely. So John, can you tell us about, now this was, I'm going to ask you to tell you the first time you had a hot call and your adrenaline got going. And this was Baltimore in the 80s, right?
Yeah. 1980s. Look, there was field training we went through, and I'm sure there were times with that, as a young patrolman or police officer, we use those terms interchangeably. You really didn't know what you're doing, but you always had someone to rely on. And my first really hot call, first two things actually, was in Sector 2 of the Northwest District. And my very first call for service was for a burglary. And it was an area we call way down in the hole. And back then they gave you a little carbon copy of a map and your battery for your radio. And when shift change came up, they pulled in the car, you changed the batteries, they gave you the radio, you took your thing, and you started getting calls. I never made it to the first call. I never could find it. To this day, I don't think I can find that address. Even with GPS, I don't think it would happen. But the very first hot call I had that comes to mind is I got a call for a shooting, and I was probably 22.
Oh, wow. You're super young.
I was by myself. It was midnight shift, and I'm driving into the end of the street in a residential area, the Northwest District of Baltimore, and there's a lot of woods. And I get there, and there's 4 or 5 young men. I'm 16, 17, and they're carrying one of their buddies. And he'd been shot in the left half of his chest with it, close range with a shotgun. And this was my first experience with someone that had been traumatically injured. And I could tell, even that being green, a real rookie, I could tell that he probably wasn't going to make it. And when you get the call, the first thing is, okay, what I got to do? I don't want to mess up. I don't want to be that guy right at the academy that screws things up. And God forbid the sergeant has to come down there and correct you and tell you to do things, or the senior officers. I want to get everything right. So I'm thinking, number one, don't wreck the car. Don't hit anything on the way down there. Get down there, protect the crime scene, do all that stuff, make the notifications, and go along. And then I found out later on that the young guy died, and there wasn't anything I could do about it to begin with. But somewhere I wanted to be that guy that came in, ripped his shirt open. There's a super S right there, and you're save the day, save his life, and I'll make everything right. And you're not able to do any of that. They eventually arrested someone, and I'll be honest with you, so long ago, I don't recall what happened to him. There was a time I remembered all that stuff, and I'll be honest with you, Steve, I've gotten really good at forgetting a lot of names and incidents, because there's things I really don't want to remember anymore. And I think that would be one of the many, many homicides that I don't want to recall.
Yeah, I can't blame you. It's funny when my podcast started over at LAPD, at the lunch table, so many of the guys that had so many traumatic stories like that, they didn't think they had any stories to tell. They're like, I don't know. I mean, I didn't solve any giant crimes. I don't remember much of, I'll have to think about it. And then they listened to the podcast a few times and they came back to me and they're like, I have like a dozen stories I can tell you. I'm like, I'm sure you have 5 times that many stories. But yeah, I think it just, like your brain blots it out just for your own sanity.
There comes a point where, I've been retired now 30 years. I got retired at very young, 33. So my wife knows that the nightmares are nowhere near as frequent as they used to be. They're nowhere near as intense, but they still pop up. And sometimes they're directly related to incidents, but most of the time they're not. They're very indirect. And, I accept the fact that I'm dinged up physically, mentally, and that's okay. A lot of my guests on my show will say that, I'm damaged goods, but I'm okay. If you watch NASCAR, for example, quite often the car that wins the race has duct tape and stuff all over it, and you got fenders hanging off. Just because it's damaged and dinged and dented doesn't mean it's worthless. That car can still run. So old guys like me, I say guys, that means men and women, old police like us, we may be dinged up and damaged goods, but we can still run and we can still perform.
Yeah, absolutely. You just jarred my memory there. I was talking to my wife a while ago about just police salaries and how they want to get rid of qualified immunity, all this stuff they want to do to the police to hurt them. And if you ever looked at the statistics of like how long most cops live after they retire, it's so saddening. It's right. Like, it's 7.5 years after 50 or something like that. Not for everybody. My father retired a lieutenant and he's 75. He's great. But like you, he retired and he did something. Like he's got stuff to do. He's staying busy. He's not, not chasing that adrenaline dump or whatever. But a lot of cops, men and women out there who retired, they don't make it. They drop dead, That's
unfortunately, a lot of them drink themselves to death. They get bored. Then they go to the bar every day and seeking companionship. Their relationships are ruined. They isolate and they don't want to be around people and all the things that we all deal with. I had to make a decision a long time ago, get sober and stay sober. And I've been sober 30 years. And I'm the guy. I'm not a vegetarian. I'm not a pescatarian. I'm not one of those things. But I watch what I eat. I go to bed around the same time. I tell people might be the biggest square you'll ever meet in radio, and I'm quite all right with that. I'm totally okay with that because the older I get, the longer I want to be around, and life is really getting good. So what you do, what I do, talking into a microphone, preparing a show, is something anybody in this line of work can do because we're pretty good at adapting. We're pretty good at filling up air with things to say. And I'll give you an example. We're also good salespeople. We don't realize it, but we've been selling options to people for a long time.
Absolutely.
You can go enjoy your weekend, go away for the evening, or you can get hauled off to jail with me. It's your choice. And by the way, if you want to fight, I'll just call for help and there'll be 50 fat, angry police here ready to thump on you. So it's your choice. But that's sales 101. That's not complicated. So radio is a great outlet, and I got to find something to do. If I sit around with nothing to do, I'm going to start thinking, and I'll start thinking about stuff in the past and things that were not good and worry about the future and all those things. And that's just there's an old saying, my mind is like a really, really bad neighborhood. I don't want to go there by myself. I went there for a long time, and there's places you and I wouldn't go without backup. And we should not go in our brains without backup, period.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true what you said about the retiring. So many coppers retire and it's almost like the job was keeping them sober because they had those hours to go to. They were drinking outside a lot, but as soon as they shed that, they retired. It's like now cocktail hours. Why wait till 5 or why I'm on days off permanently and they just drink every day, all day. So I've seen that. I know exactly what you're talking about, which is a shame. Good for you for getting sober and staying clear-minded and killing it out there. That's the best thing you could do. Absolutely. John, can you tell us about the strangest or most bizarre thing you dealt with on the job?
There's actually so many stories I think about. And when I originally saw this question, Steve, I started thinking, well, I don't really want to go down memory lane and I can tell you stories about being on domestic calls where my side partner opened up a closet door and they found the family dog hung killed by one of the spouses. People stabbing each other over leading the family prayer at Thanksgiving. Things that are so bizarre. Or say, hey, officer, you want to sit down a little bit? And there's so many cockroaches running over the chair, you wouldn't dare sit down. But many people were very, very civil, and they didn't want you to be there, but they realized you had to be there for whatever reason. And I started thinking, okay, so what can I tell you? When I got promoted to sergeant, I got moved to Central District, and in that area, we had an area called the Block, which is world famous for strip clubs, gentlemen clubs, or whatever you want to call them, exotic dancers. And I was acting lieutenant one night. So part of my responsibilities was to make sure that the block was clear and no one was getting in trouble and show my face periodically. As I was walking down the street, I saw a young woman turn out to be an exotic dancer. That's the term they use. I don't know what they call them nowadays. I locked my keys out of my car. So she showed me her ID and I could see the keys, and it was an old Camaro Z28. So I knew how to get in. I got into the car and I just wanted to check the registration to make sure it matched up with her license before I gave her the keys, make sure it's the right person. I opened up the glove box and I'm wearing an 8-point cap is what we used to call them.
Right.
Back in the day, we had to wear a hat every time we're out of the car. I open up the glove compartment and there's 3 sticks of dynamite taped together with a fuse. And I reacted and I hit the T-top with my head, almost knocking myself out, knocked the hat right off my head, turned around, and I wound up getting, reestablished. And I wound up locking her. What are you doing? What do you have dynamite in your car for? She goes, oh, it's not. It's road flares. I use that to scare people. Well, I said, mission accomplished, because you got me. And she's dressed up in her exotic dancer attire, and I'm walking her down the street to get arrested and processed for that. So it's the little things you think. There's an old saying, complacency kills in police work. I never in my life thought I would see that in someone's car. And look, people do crazy things. So they would design something that looks like sticks of dynamite. They can shake out the window of people going on the interstate to scare them. Okay, now I get it. Back then, I didn't get it at all.
Yeah. I've never worked in a city the size of Baltimore or with the population like Baltimore, the high crime areas. I feel like you would quickly lose faith in humanity going just call after call in a city like that. Like you said, with the cockroaches and the dog murder and then the prostitutes and then the murders, the shootings. It's crazy that guys even people can do a 30-year career in those circumstances.
I don't know how they do it. When I was on there, we were supposed to have like 3,000 police. The population in Baltimore in the 1980s was, and I'm estimating, was right around 880,000. And we averaged right around 300 murders a year. Last time I checked, the population in Baltimore is like 660,000. They're about 500 officers short, and their murders are 300 a year. Whoa. So even though their population's dropped by about 200,000, their murder rate's the same. We had shootings, Steve, literally multiple times a shift in our sector alone. And there's 9 districts in the city. So we had 2 sectors in our district that were really hopping, that were really hot. The lower end of Sector 3, all of Sector 1, and about a half of Sector 2 are really, really hot. And you could go from undelivered mail, parking complaint, water in the basement, a bat in the house, which I had to deal with as a rookie police, right, to handling 3 shootings in a row, rapes, murders. You never knew what you're going to get. And sometimes in summer, we would have... Literally, we'd get our car at shift change and you'd have 8 calls backed up and the entire sector, the entire district was down. And we went by mentality that if you had to come on my post to handle my calls, your post was abandoned. And so someone had to handle calls on your post. The next thing you know, people are coming into our sector from other sectors. Next thing you know, after that, people from other districts are coming into our district to handle calls. And as a matter of pride, we wouldn't let that happen. So we would stack them up. And there were times where you went call to call to call and there's no backup available. even though there was a guy, a man or woman, a mile away from you. They were doing the same thing.
That's crazy. And in the 80s, they were probably you guys doing handwritten reports then?
Oh, yeah, handwritten reports, right in triplicate. And they had the automatic copy. And then you'd write it all down with your chicken scratch notes. You'd jump from call to call, give them to your sergeant in the shift. He said, you made a mistake and hand it back to you. Or you rip it up and hand it back to you. You got to write the whole thing over again. The staff review is not going to improve this. And here's a quick story. We'll move to the next point. I was working in operations, and my sergeant's name was Bob, and he was a good guy. He had a habit of picking his nose a lot, so we made fun of him about that. But I had an armed robbery arrest from a fast food restaurant, and I walked in the report. He goes, you forgot a victim's name. I'm like, oh, my goodness. So I said, I'll go back. It's about a mile away. I'll go back and get it. He says to me as I'm leaving, whatever you do, go there, get the information, and come right back. Don't do anything else. That was his words. This is what Bob said to me. I'm pulled out of the parking lot of the chicken joint, and guess what happens? 3 stolen cars go by me, and I could not go after them. Just couldn't do it. They went in different directions. Next thing you know, I had 5 stolen car arrests, an armed robbery arrest, and a really, really angry sergeant. Like, you can't follow the simplest directions. But that was the way it was. It wasn't just me. That's the way it was for everybody.
Yeah. I went to academy with a guy, a bunch of guys it was a regional academy. So some went to the city, some went out to the towns, some people went out to the sticks. But I ended up bumping into one of my buddy's sergeants at a firearms instructor recertification. And he was the guy, he ended up being an ass kicker, like a great cop to have. But now, I mean, they want reports on everything, like computer reports written and for data so the admin can have numbers to crunch and get money and budget. And it's important to have the info. So he was telling me, he's like, man, he's a great cop, and he's a guy you want there on like an armed robbery or a domestic or whatever. But he goes, the lieutenant tracked me down the other night and said, you need to sit down and do some reports with one of your patrolmen. He goes, oh, how many reports is he behind? He goes, over 50. I was like, oh my gosh, over 50 reports. Because that's one thing we heard, like when I started in early 2000s in law enforcement, the guys that were retiring were kind of like the good old days of policing, where they weren't, if you did a report, it was like, a couple lines, or the big stuff got reports, but the little stuff, they didn't have to do it. So they were kind of like happy to be leaving the computer age, leaving the way things were going. So that's interesting. So John, can you tell us about your most intense or terrifying call that you went on?
There's actually a couple. Very briefly, I do this every now and then on the show. I don't go into details. It's not about me. I was in 4 shootings in years, and the first time I fired back. There's a couple close calls, and arresting a guy who's a drunk and disorderly, caught me with broken glass and smoke inhalation a couple times from rescuing people from houses.
Jeez.
That were on fire. But the last 2 shootings really got to me. And one in particular, I'll never forget this guy's name, and I'd love to forget it. His name is Garfield Dundee Tinkler. We get a call for Baltimore County, which is a jurisdiction outside of us, had a murder, armed robbery of a commercial establishment, murder of the owner, and they took the victim's Corvette. And I was a sergeant, and I was driving with another sergeant in a brand new police car, lieutenant's car. And he's like, whatever you do, again, don't wreck the car. So when the call came out, being on the lookout for this car, and it was a burgundy Corvette with a convertible top. And so they found it just outside of our district in a neighboring district. And I pulled into a school parking lot at the end of a one-way street. There's only one way out. And I said to them, because I worked stolen cars for a long time, if you can, pop the hood and pull the coil wire so they can't start it. They get in the car, they can't start it. Apparently they didn't have time. Within a moment or two later, the guy came back, got in the car, and it sounded like a Stephen King type movie. He came around the corner. There was burning rubber. There was noise. There was gunshots. It was hitting parked cars. I pull out in my Chevy Caprice, the old one, and I've got my blue lights on, and there's no way for this guy to go. There's one way, and I'm blocking it. And he starts firing out the window, the driver's window, with a semi-automatic 45, and hits the Caprice head on. And it was enough to buckle my door, and I had a hard time opening it. He bails out, is running on my side behind the car, and he's firing shots. And my partner, a guy named Jim, I could hear him in the background saying something, almost like a TV in another room. You don't understand what they're saying. I'm so focused on this guy. I reach over, I kick the door open, I start chasing him, and I get into a gunfight with the guy. And I came to the realization that I'd fired 4 of the 6 shots in my revolver. I'm in the middle of the street. I got no cover, no concealment, no nothing. And I don't know if I've hit him, if I've hit ducks. I don't know what I've hit. But he's trying to reload that 45. And he's stumbling with it. So I decided I'd run up and tackle him, which I did. I didn't realize that he was stumbling because I'd shot him in the wrist and he couldn't quite make it work. And immediately afterwards, the emergency vehicle unit came up. They had this cell phone in there, it was built into the vehicle. I called my wife. I said, "You'll see this on the news. I'm okay." And she was furious, and not in a bad way. She was scared because I'd been through a lot of stuff before, and I knew what was coming down the pike. Once I got done with her, I started throwing up, and it took a long time. As a matter of fact, a few months ago, I was driving down South Florida. I'm one of those guys that lives in Florida now. And a guy makes a U-turn in front of me in a Corvette, same color with same color top. And I had one of those moments. And it's like, it brought it right back. And I quickly realized it was the wrong year, wrong model. And by the way, I'm in Florida. This ain't Baltimore. And it's not 30 years ago, whatever it was, 20 some odd years ago.
Right.
So that was one. That was pretty hairy. And the other one was the one that ended my career. And long story short, I was following a vehicle and I called it in, and the dispatcher said, "Is there someone in that car?" Which is, when you say that, because we didn't have the in-car computers, that means it's stolen. Yeah. And he was reaching around for stuff. So I followed him. It wasn't a chase. It wasn't any stuff. He wrecked. And I wound up getting him out of the car, and I had my revolver in my right hand and him on the ground. And I was trying to holster my revolver and cuff him, at which time he took me and him off the ground. And I was 6 foot, 210 pounds, benching about 300 at a time. I was pretty good shape. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, and a fight ensued. And I hit the guy with everything I had, and it didn't faze him. Next thing you know, he had a hold of my gun while still in my hand, and we're firing shots off. Ooh. And it's turned towards my face, and I'm trying to avoid. I had the thought in my mind, Steve, this guy was trying to kill me, and I was going to die. But I knew deep down that I was going to die, but it wasn't going to be that night. And it wasn't going to be because of him. And in that moment, I was prepared to do whatever it took to survive. The old saying we hear people saying academies and in-service training, all that stuff, never give up the fight, stay in the fight. At that moment, I made the decision, and I'm sure I was screaming. I'm sure I was sounding weird, uncool, not like Clint Eastwood, none of that stuff. I'm sure it was not my best moment. But I survived. He was arrested. He got 10 years. I'm sure he probably did too, the way Baltimore is and Maryland is. And then I thought I sprained my wrist. Long story short, multiple surgeries, seal placed, and I was retired. It was over.
Wow. That's crazy, man. That is intense. That one would give you nightmares for sure. Barrel of a gun.
Well, for a long time, I'd fall asleep. And the area where you're falling asleep, yes, right before I'd hear gunshots right next to my head, and it's almost like a jolt of electricity through my head, and it jumped me right out of bed. And it's like, oh, here we go. It's going to be a long time falling asleep. And that would happen sometimes once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks. But it happened for quite a while. Thank goodness it doesn't happen very often anymore. It's been a couple of years.
Yeah, thank goodness indeed. When you retired from there, did you stay in the Baltimore area long, or did you get out of there? I would have said, see you later.
I went to Southern Maryland, which is about 2 hours south of there, and that was still too close because I had to go to Baltimore to see the police physician and all this other stuff, the lawyers and all that. And I just, there's too many reminders, too many physical reminders. So I eventually, about 97, moved to Florida after my marriage failed and started a new life down here, got into radio, which took me out out of Southern Maryland, South Florida into North Florida, back to Southern Maryland for a few years, and back here to the Keys in South Florida. So it's been a long journey, but now that we're here, my wife and I say we enjoy the taxes, the politics, and the lack of winter. We're not leaving. Unlike you, we're not going to have snow ever again in our lives.
We're not enjoying any of those things. We have high taxes. It's freezing half the year.
Come on down to Florida. We'll make room for you. There's plenty of room.
Believe you me, I have thought about it because my in-laws live down there on the Gulf side, South Gulf side. I can't remember the biggest city they're near. Maybe near Clearwater. Would that be right?
Clearwater, Sarasota, Tampa, that area.
Yeah, outside there somewhere, and it's like gorgeous. It's unbelievable.
I'm in the southeast side. I'm in Palm Beach County. So I call this area South Yorkadelphia. So it's like New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Boston. And then you go to the west coast of Florida and it's Chicago, Detroit. Everybody comes on I-75 and settles in that area. So it's a totally different world. And then you go to North Florida and you're in the deep South.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like really, really, it's like Alabama up there.
Yeah. I have cousins that live in North Florida and they're Southern folks for sure. One of them competes with his mutter truck, and after supper, they'll take you out by the swamp and shoot old fire extinguishers that he collected from his job.
When I got to do a morning show in North Florida, in Lake City, Florida, I was meeting some guy and having a cup of coffee. He looks at me and goes, you're new. You're the radio guy. Like, yeah. He goes, you want to go hog hunting with me? I'm like, I don't think I want to do that. I've seen, the south of Georgia lines and all that stuff, and all those. Deliverance is the first thing I thought of. I was like, no, I'll pass on that. Thank you.
You just started hearing a banjo.
The banjo, and I'm paddle faster. I'm getting out of here.
Oh, man, that's tough, John. Retiring or getting retired medically that young. I hope that they kept the cost of living and percentages up for you, because that's a long-ass time to be retired on a policeman's salary. I mean, obviously you're working. It's good, but...
Yeah. I couldn't afford not to work. When I retired, immediately my health insurance tripled. So it became a third of my pension. And I know officers in wheelchairs that can't work, that are in the same position as me. And we had to fight the city in court for years to get our cost of living allowances. And literally it took years, a decade. So everything in that city that we have to fight tooth and nail to get. Because the city will not take care of us. And
exhausting.
The young police that come in there, I love them. God bless them. I pray for them. But I tell them, if you think things are bad as an active duty police in a city like Baltimore, wait till you retire and find out how little they really care about you.
Yeah, isn't it terrible? My friend of mine's grandfather was a trooper in Massachusetts for like 40 years, and he retired. And when I first started in the early 2000s, he had been retired for like 35 years. And his pension was $8,000. So
yeah, it's a shame.
They went into the state house, and the state police union actually got it taken care of, where he went from 8,000 to like 32,000 overnight. But for years, it's like poverty level. Like the guy's in his late 80s and he's got no money coming. And thankfully he had, some Social Security quarters or whatever, but it was just, I don't know. You always hear like people are always coveting police benefits, but it's not like that when you leave. They're not taking care of you like that.
We were told, and I'm sure you heard this too, that from day one in the academy, if something bad happens to you, we got your back. We'll take care of you. And we're family. And we are. And I'm not anti-police. They did the best they could.
Right.
The minute it gets into the accountants and bean counters and workers' compensation insurance, don't even get me started on those clowns. The minute it gets in their hands, you are a number. And there's nothing the agency can do for you. I've had people on my show. I had a deputy who was shot multiple times, almost killed by a serial rapist in Texas, in a small department in Texas. He retired on Social Security. He lost everything, lost his house. A sergeant in Oklahoma was shot on a SWAT call out with a .308 rifle, lost the use of most of his arm, was fired. A lieutenant in Oklahoma was shot in the forehead by a murder suspect chasing him, wrecked his patrol car. He was given a Social Security pension. So there are a lot of people out there, And my wife and I, we joke all the time, especially around elections. We'll hear these commercials about these evil corporations and how they don't take care of their people. That's why you need to vote for so-and-so. And we always say, yeah, the biggest offenders are our cities, our counties, our state governments, and our federal governments as well for not taking care of their people. Their first responders or law enforcement, those people, military, tell me, they don't get taken care of the way they should.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awful. It really is. John, can you tell us about if this exists in Baltimore? Can you tell me about a heartwarming encounter?
Yeah, there were plenty. When I got assigned to post, that was like the big thing. And I remember when I got my first nickname, and that meant you arrived and people got to know you, and they'd invite you to their backyard cookouts, even people you've had confrontations with and arrested before. It wasn't always negative. But on rare occasions on the summertime and Saturday mornings before it got busy, we'd have a chance to hang out with neighborhood kids. They're playing, and I'm a hairy guy, and we'd have our short sleeve shirts on and the window down, arm out the window, talking to them, and they'd rub my arm and when they're talking to you. And it's such a nice thing to get to hang out with kids and get to know them. That was one of the upsides. The downsides, I think we've talked about this, is I've been on scene when some of those kids 5 years later were shot and killed and took their last breaths. And because they got in the drug game and they shorted their dealer. It wasn't competition that got them. It wasn't a ripoff artist. It was their own dealer that got them because they were short on the count too many times. And sometimes that really pleasant part is you hope that you can do something really, really good for these people, but then you realize you can't. You do the best you can. That's all you can do.
Yeah, you got to take those little victories and cherish them because, like you said there, I've heard so many stories like that about city youth, like 13 years old, stone cold killer, no moral compass, just will straight up murder somebody if told to do so by the drug dealer. That's like I was saying before. That's why the burnout rate's so high in the big cities. It's hard for people to stomach a career that. So John, I don't know how heartwarming that was, but it was kind of heartwarming.
Well, parts of it are really good. I think of the good times, and that's why I try to. When I think about policing, I think of the men and women I worked with. They were phenomenal people. The practical jokes we played on each other. We used to have mace battles where me and this guy, may he rest in peace. And when someone decided they didn't want to get out of the car at a traffic stop, it's no problem. I'm going to arrest you one way or the other. You're getting out of this car. We just lean against the car door and spray the mace in the vent in front of the windshield, and they'd eventually come out. Well, I did that to my patrolman side partner's car, and he's driving down the street, a roll call, right? Shift change, crying out the window. I'll get you. But he always got me. But I remember those times, and there's lots of really, really good times. And there's lots of really good times with the people that in our communities. They weren't all bad. The vast majority weren't bad. The vast majority were hardworking folks that they had bad situations going on, but would give you their last dollar. They were the best of the best. They drove the short end of the stick and had to live in a really bad neighborhood.
Yeah, I heard that a lot from guys who worked in South LA and East LA when it was really, really bad. And South LA is really bad now, but same thing for them, and especially if they did not grow up there themselves, they got exposed to it. And one detective who's a friend of mine, David Scotto, said in one of the interviews, he said, it's all good people. He said, it's like, it really is. It's like anything else. There's a small percentage of people that are violent and scary dudes. And those are the ones you deal with when you're there. And there's more of them there. But he said, 95% of the people I met, like in the neighborhoods, just good people, just trying to avoid the trouble. They don't want to live there. They believe me, they don't. They want to go somewhere else. They want to raise their families in safety. Their kids are getting killed. It's really true. And I've heard that a few times now. So John, one of our big or one of the biggest questions I have here, or most popular answers, I should say, to this question is advice for new police officers, for candidates. Because there's a lot of people in police academy now or thinking about doing it who kind of listen to all the episodes of this podcast and they used it to get pumped up, get excited about the job, and they really love what guys like you can tell them about it and what maybe they could use to prepare.
Well, first of all, I love police work. Some of the best people I've met in my life were police. And I will never, ever apologize for defending them, ever. So when you go into police work, don't let the negativity get you down. And there's certain things you can do. First of all, your honor, your integrity means everything. So once you violate those two things, there's no coming back from that. So no matter what it is, don't ever violate your personal honor and your integrity. Secondly, treat everybody with respect until they change the tone of the conversation. We talked about this before, especially in their house, in front of their friends. Treat them with respect, but let people know that you're not going to be pushed around because they're watching you. And you're as a police officer in uniform, you're very much in a fishbowl. People see you and they will watch you. And if you let someone get away with disrespecting you, the next thing is going to be a punch. And after that, it's a knife or a gun. So be aware that you have to be firm, you have to be resolute, but be fair. The last thing I'm going to say is this. We grow up that we have a dentist and we have a family doctor and we go see them once a year for physicals and checkups and all that stuff. If you're going to get into policing, same with firefighting, dispatching, corrections officers, any of that stuff, make sure you get a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, social worker that's trained and familiar in trauma, and go see them once a year, just as a proactive move that I'm doing okay. So they can help you stay on track and help you. It's not the big things, I feel, that get us. We've gotten really good about dealing with those. It's the daily grind that will wear you down. So go see them and do things like keep what you, if you're a Boy Scout leader, stay a Boy Scout leader. If you go to church every Sunday with your family, when you're off, go to church. Maintain your relationships and your friendships out of law enforcement. Don't make the mistake of making it all a smaller circle where it's just you and the cops and you against them. And next thing you know, even the cops you worked with, they don't understand you and you wind up isolating from everybody. So stay and do those corny things. If it's camping, if it's cooking out or whatever it is, do those things. And maintain those relationships. They will save you in the long run.
Great advice. I agree 1,000%. John, before we wrap up here, can you tell us a little bit more about your radio show, Law Enforcement Today, and kind of what your message is there and where people can find it?
We do something very similar to you. In 2017, I launched a podcast, knowing what I knew from radio work and law enforcement. I really wanted to make it for first responders and their spouses, so we could understand and get rid of some of the stigma. And what I did was I made a deal with someone at a really big Facebook page, Law Enforcement Today. And I was posting it on there organically. And someone from a radio station upstate New York heard an episode we did, reached out to us, said, can you convert it to radio? Which we did. I self-syndicated 13 stations, and we're now syndicated through Talk Media Network. We have 81 official affiliate radio stations. We broadcast weekly to about 24 million combined population. And it's one of two things. It's either cops talking about realities of doing investigations, serial killers, rapists, all those sorts of things, dealing with traumatic events, telling their stories, what they went through. And about 60% of it is law enforcement officers, other first responders, military, victims of crime, their family members, spouses, or survivors talk about trauma they went through, how it impacted them, because it's kind of universal for everybody. But it's definitely going to be universal if you're in law enforcement. You're going to deal with this one way or the other. How it impacted them and what they did to build their lives afterwards. And that seems to be, those two stories are a winning combination. So I tell radio stations, we do for radio what Investigation Discovery Channel does for television. So one of the hardest things I have to do with Steve is, I didn't have to do with you, is I tell cops, look, don't testify like you're talking in court. Don't try to be an expert like an in-service training, because everybody gets bored with that. Just tell your story and make it for everybody else to consume. Because if we don't tell our stories, who will? And by the way, we've relied on the news media for so long to tell our stories, and they've butchered it. They've destroyed it. And now it's so biased, it doesn't even resemble the truth. So we need to tell our stories. Otherwise, people have no idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, the show is great. I love your radio show and your podcast. It's awesome. I listen to the podcast mostly because I'm not, I don't know if I'm near one of your affiliates or not. Do you have any in the Northeast?
I don't think I have several in the Northeast. I think the closest one would be in Westchester, New York. I don't think I have one in Massachusetts yet. So I know there's guys who listen in the squad car at night. because I see the downloads increasing. And by the way, you can find the podcast version for free. It's on demand, whatever you want. It's almost 400 episodes. You can listen when you have some downtime or troll car, whatever it might be. I see the downloads at between 2 and 4 in the morning is one of my busiest times.
Yeah.
You tell me who else is listening.
Dog watch.
So it's them. And you can listen to it wherever podcasts are served. You can go to letradioshow.com. You can do a Google search for Law Enforcement Today podcast, Law Enforcement Today radio show, Law Enforcement Today podcast, John Jay Wiley, whatever, you'll find it.
Awesome. Very good. John Jay Wiley, thank you for coming on the show, brother. It was a blast.
Steve, I appreciate it. I'm glad we got to do this. We talked a long time ago before you took your break, and I'm glad to see. By the way, you can find Steve's show on our Facebook page. Social media is a great way to interact and ignore the haters. That's what I do. I post and go. I don't even look at the comments anymore. So if someone goes, I hate police, I'm like, yeah, I ban them or I hide them, one or the other. I don't really mess with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, for a long time we relied on the media, but now I think because of the humanizing the badge movement, it's become it's less of a faux pas for a police officer to kind of speak his mind about how he feels about the job and how it's affected him. It's become kind of acceptable.
There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Right.
I've got nothing to be ashamed of. I hold my head proud for what I did. Same with everybody else. Look, the stories about the corrupt cops get all the headlines, because the rest of us are not telling anybody.
Right.
So when you deliver a baby, no one hears about it. When you rescue people from a burning house, no one hears about it. Well, we need to change that. And by the way, for the brass, the police department, administrators, chiefs of police, everybody else, let your people talk. They can be anonymous, but let them talk and let them tell their stories. Because if you're not telling the stories about what great police we have in this country, trust me, no one is.
Amen to that, brother. John, thank you so much, sir. I know you probably got to run. You got stuff going on.
A lot of radio stuff to do.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir. And I will see you on Clubhouse and maybe in person one of these days if I make it down to Florida.
Ideal. It'd be great to meet you. We can always meet halfway. Actually, you go to North Florida and I'll drive a couple hours north. I'm not going to Massachusetts.
Can't blame me there. All right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
See you, John. Guys, that was episode number 97 with the great John Jay Wiley. What a voice. Silky, not silky, brassy tones. I'm not good at words. Anyways, awesome episode. Crazy stories. Baltimore. It sounds like exactly how I would think policing in Baltimore would be. Totally insane. Thank you for joining us. Thank you guys for listening. Please keep rating and reviewing. If you have a mom, a dad, a sister, a brother, a mother-in-law, father-in-law, anybody, a cousin, brother, sister, anybody who is in law enforcement that was for any amount of time that has some stories and you think they might want to be a guest, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, please reach out, steve@thingspolicec.com. Shoot me a message. Let me know. Let's get you on here. I have a bunch of shows in the can. Plenty of people messaging me about coming on. So things are good here. The numbers are rising. I truly appreciate it. I mean it. If there's any way this somehow could become a retirement gig for me or a legitimate side hustle, I would fully embrace that. I would leave police work if I could pay my bills with this podcast. I like doing it that much. It really isn't like work at all. It's really fun. So thank you for joining us, guys, and I'll see you next time.